specifically in Bright Horizon centers, and then we would encourage families to do this at home, is to use writing very purposefully and in service to other things. So I'm clearly on a theme here, but if you want children to explore a scientific concept, writing should be part of it. If you want them to do something about social emotional or self-help or social rules in the classroom, writing can be part of it. Hi, Claire. We're back together again.
We're back together for another episode of the podcast. I'm really excited about today's topic because we're talking about something that I know you and I both really value in our personal lives and our professional lives, becoming a writer, becoming a skilled writer.
Yes. And it's multifaceted. So it's the mechanics, it's the technical side of it, but it's also creative writing and knowing how to communicate and synthesize ideas. And it's something that is important to both of us. We do a lot of it in our work, but it's also something that a lot of people don't feel confident in. So it's good to get these young children both developing the skills, but also the confidence.
I don't remember. I feel like I'm a pretty confident writer now as an adult, but I do sort of remember feeling frustrated as a child sometimes that I couldn't get my thoughts out on the page. And I really, really am glad that I stuck with it. But I also just have always been a lover of books and stories and fiction. And I know now, as a child development expert, that really probably fueled some of my writing confidence eventually, because the more reading I did, the more interested in becoming a writer I became. And it kind of became a cycle. And I know you have been writing all kinds of things for a really long time.
Yeah, I think what you just said, though, about getting your thoughts on the page, I want to hold that and come back to it, because that is one of the things that's so important about writing. And what that does is it's a whole cognitive process that's happening. So we're going to talk about that more, but I just glued into that because it's not just about the how, it's the process of it and the value of it too. I've been writing for a really long time. I was fortunate enough to go to a grade school that had something called the Bookmaking Center. Ooh. And you got to sign up to go to the Bookmaking Center. It was a room full of typewriters and laminators and
super
Mrs.
jealous.
Thames. Yeah, Mrs. Thames. And she would basically teach you the art of storytelling and writing and help you create a book. And I won a blue ribbon at the state fair. Maybe I was in third grade or something. But that really, I think, inspired me to that I could be a writer and that it was fun and enjoyable to make up stories and be creative. I also lived overseas for a year when I was in fourth grade, and we had no television and we had very few entertainment options in English. And so I just read books. And together, those two things were very formative to me in valuing writing and reading. And that's when I started to say, when I grow up, I want to be a writer. So I'm not a full-time writer, but I write a lot in my work.
Yeah, you're published. You published articles that I read as a professional in magazines, and you're a published children's book author, which I think is really cool personally, because I love children's literature so much.
Well, and the thing I started publishing, I started with articles, but I also have written a journal series for military families, and I was part of a military family, and so it was focused on deployment and processing deployment. And the reason I wrote a journal series is what I've now already talked about once, but I'll talk about it again, is the value of writing as a way to process and to explore your own thinking. And so that, again, you can see a theme in what I value in terms of writing is not only in the skill set of writing, which is very important, and we need to talk about it because kids there's less focus on that, and we need to all make sure that we don't lose the focus on that. Yeah. But what writing does for you as a way to learn and process and expand your ideas and express your ideas. So all of that is baked into the way, and my children's books are using books and writing to discover, explore social issues that are relevant to children. So again, using writing as a purpose.
Yeah. I know that my children are adolescents, tweens and teens, and they're not learning cursive anymore in school, but they are still needing to learn to write and be writers. Yeah. And even my youngest, who sometimes it says it's not his favorite thing to do, in terms of schoolwork, I remind him, I can't think of a single profession where you wouldn't at least have to write an email to someone to communicate an ask or a request or feedback. It's just going to be writing is part of life. Yep. And it could be your career, or it could just be a part of your job someday. Yep. Even texting is writing, right? I know that there's lots of abbreviations, but it's a skill that kids do need to learn.
It's communication, right? It's expressing yourself. It's being able to adapt how you communicate with someone. And I think cursive is becoming a secret language. My children always say they can't read anything I write in cursive, and they don't know the difference between. One of my daughters is, why do I have to sign something and print my name? What is the difference?
What's the difference? It's an interesting question.
Yeah. So, but all that to say, everybody still needs to know how to write.
That's right.
And the mechanics of it, and being able to print, and that's something we focus on a lot in early childhood, even from infancy. And we'll get into talking about how we do that. But specifically in Bright Horizon centers, and then we would encourage families to do this at home, is to use writing very purposefully and in service to other things. So I'm clearly on a theme here, but if you want children to explore a scientific concept, writing should be part of it. If you want them to do something about social emotional or self-help or social rules in the classroom, writing can be part of it. So meaningful, authentic ways of communicating and, again, expressing yourself, whether it's creatively or another way that you're adapting your message or thinking critically or getting your point across or influencing or persuading. We need writing more than anything.
All of that.
Yeah.
So I think what's interesting is it's more complex of a skill than parents might realize at first. So if let's start with our infants, right? Let's start at the beginning. For those of you who are listening who have an infant and maybe you're an avid reader like me and you're looking at your baby and you're hoping they'll be a Pulitzer Prize winner someday. Maybe not. Maybe you just want them to write an email that sounds intelligent. So with our infants, you are actually already working on writing skills. Yeah. Which is fascinating.
Yeah. We need there's a lot of different things. So we can both pepper in different skills that infants need, but just that, if you watch an infant, so if you have an infant, you're certainly watching them and they're figuring out their fingers and toes. They're figuring out how to make purposeful movements with their body. They're figuring out that they have a body. They're just getting to know. We want them to be able to grasp things, to be able to practice using that fine motor. We want, and it won't be all that fine at the beginning. No. It's the large movements. It's kind of those shaky movements, I think, that are so adorable, but they're just trying so hard to do something purposeful. Yeah. But those early sensory grasping things that they're doing, that's all the beginning of writing development, as is a lot of the communication they're doing. So when adults are talking to infants and respecting infants' verbalizations back to them, or even waving hand motions or whatever expressions, that's recognizing and helping a baby start to understand that there's a back and forth communication and that they can express themselves and be heard. So those are two things that are happening every day with an infant.
It's good to remember, parents of infants, that language development is tied to writing development. And even though your baby can't say words back to you yet, they are absorbing like a sponge every single sound that they hear. Exactly. And we know this because there's some amazing functional MRI machines, which we can put babies in now, and they're not invasive and the babies don't mind being in them. And you can see on these MRIs the way that infants' brains light up differently than just hearing nothing, or hearing just like parents saying a couple words a day versus hundreds of thousands of words a day. So talking to your baby now will make them better writers later, which is so cool to think about.
Yeah. And reading a lot of books. So we would say this for all sorts of reasons, that reading books to all children all the time, definitely daily is important. But adults often naturally just use their finger to trace along the words of a book or point out words in a book. And that starts to help a child see that and they're not getting it completely in infancy, but you're building the foundations of this, is that these little squiggly marks here on the page, they're symbols and they mean something, and I'm following along. There's a left to right orientation. If English is the language you're speaking or in learning to write. So they start to pick up on those things, so you can start to do those things. Again, they're not going to get that by the time they are a toddler, but it's building those foundations that you can start when they're infants.
Yeah. So perfect. So let's talk about toddlers now. It's not super different from infants, except that a big thing is that the fine motor skills, those small finger movements, are getting better and better and better. They're picking up food and making it directly into their mouth with some accuracy now. They're picking objects up and playing with them purposefully with meaning. So that's the beginning of writing skills.
It's a good example, like picking up a spoon and using your spoon helps with writing development, because it's that controlled fine motor skill. So as much as you can do that, we have to be even more thoughtful about it now, as children have a lot of screens in their lives and a lot of touch screens in their lives. So they're not getting some of the fine motor development that naturally happened before those things happen. So just making sure that they have writing utensils for toddlers. You want those big chunky crayons. You want big paper. You don't want to give them coloring books. You don't want them to have to color in the lines for all sorts of reasons. But also it's hard for them to do that because they don't have that controlled movement, and we don't want them to feel like they're getting it wrong. You want them to make big movements with their arms and their motor skills while they're using writing utensils or paintbrushes or whatever it is. Just give them big chunky ones so that they can have a lot of space. And they start to try to communicate. Toddlers, they'll start to bring you something and say, this says, or will you write? They're starting to get the idea that marks have meaning, and they're going to have some squiggly lines in there that they think is writing, but you're not sure what it is, but that's just giving them the confidence and asking them, what is this about? Tell me what it's about.
What did you make here?
Yeah. Tell me about it. Instead of saying, is this a cat? Or does this say, don't ascribe your thing to it as an adult. Let them tell you about it and ask their permission. Can I write what you're saying down? Or tell me about it?
Yeah. So you're seeing marks on a page. And that's what we call them in the classroom. We say we see marks on a page, and really, and seasoned educators begin to see an evolution of marks happen. You as a parent may not notice it as keenly as a teacher might, but it really does. If you start saving some of your kids' marks on a page, I encourage you to do so and put the date on the bottom or the back, flip it over, write it really small in pencil. Yeah. You'll notice 6 months to 12 months to 18 months later, what a huge evolution there is. If they're given the chance and the time and the space and the materials, like Rachel said, like the chunky paintbrush, the big fat chalk, the big crayon, right? That they're easy to grasp and give them enough room to kind of messily make the marks on the page. You'll see them change. You'll see the change.
Yeah. And what a gift it is to them to teach them how to express themselves and communicate. I mean, that is the human experience, and they're figuring out how to do that. And so if you give them that, show them that what they're expressing has meaning and value, and you're modeling for them, but you're not rushing them. You're not worried so much about if they're doing it exactly right or if they're running out of space, we're still talking about toddlers here, but even as they get older, you don't want to overcorrect things because you want them to be free experimenting and trying.
Yeah. Another thing that I find really fascinating about fine motor, those hand muscle strength, because you want your child to be able to, when they start kindergarten or first grade, to be able to grasp that pencil and hopefully confidently start writing some letters to be successful. Backing up to toddlerhood, we have to get good control of our big muscles first. So we were talking a lot about giving them the fat crayons to hold, but also they need to be outside swinging from the monkey bars, jumping into puddles, testing out those getting that core strength in, and the core strength leads to the arm strength, leads to the wrist strength, leads to the finger strength. It's all connected. Yeah. And I think you don't think about that. Like watching your child run through the grass, they're working on writing skills in a weird way, like in a roundabout way. Yeah. It's helping their fine motor skills down the line.
Well, we use a phrase called whole child development, which basically means exactly what you're talking about, is if you support one kind of development, it's supporting other kinds of development. And that's why you wouldn't want to prefer or give more time to something than other things.
That's right.
So you don't want to cut out recess so you can have more math time, because actually the recess helps with the math. And same with you don't want to cut out art because it helps with reading and writing. Right. It all goes together. So you want that full development and learning how to control emotions and hand-eye coordination, all those things.
All the same. Right, exactly. So you're outside practicing kicking a soccer ball, and that's foot eye, which is connected to hand eye, which is connected to putting your pencil exactly on the page, where you need to start the letter C for Claire. Yeah. Isn't that, I think it's so cool. That's why I'm in this field, because I think this is fascinating. But
and kids, speaking of C for Claire, kids, and especially when they get into preschool, they love to start labeling stuff, and they love writing their names. So that's a good thing. Let them label. Let them figure out their own letters. Let them figure out that letters are symbols that represent sounds. That's a really important evolution. One thing that I always am cautioning about is memorizing the alphabet or memorizing letters, because if a child can say the alphabet, they've memorized a song. It's cute. It's fine. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean they know about letters, and it doesn't mean they know that letters are symbols. And in fact, they probably don't if they're singing the song, because that's just in an order of a catchy tune, and the order of the alphabet that we have it. It's not in the order that they easily learn to write letters.
That's right.
Or the most common usage of letters. So start with the ones that we always start with the ones that are a little bit easier, like straight lines, like a T is pretty easy.
Yeah.
An I is pretty easy.
Right.
But let them learn the letters of their name. They love it so much. And then they do need to start refining their practice as they get a little older, and you want to be supporting that, but doing it in an authentic, meaningful way. Don't waste time on a bunch of worksheets that are just wrote C over again. Let them write Claire all over the place. They're going to practice as many C's. We're just going to keep going down this road.
I know.
As they would on a worksheet, but it will mean something to them.
Well, I think that my parents could find some books from our library at home where maybe the word Claire was written on some pages where it shouldn't have been written, because I was practicing in places, property of Claire all over the book.
Yeah.
I think we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about preschoolers and things you can be doing at home to promote writing skills.
Did you know that you can get the Teach, Play, Love brand of learning for your preschooler every day? The very people you trust for parenting advice are behind our Bright Horizons preschool program. Learning adventures that inspire kids to reach their unique potential. One-of-a-kind preschool for your one-of-a-kind kid. That's Bright Horizons. Enrollment is happening now. Visit brighthorizons.com to find a center near you.
Okay, we're back. We're going to pick up our conversation about writing, and I want to pick up with preschoolers because this is where I think it starts to get really exciting, both for the child and a parent, because like you said, they'll start to come to you with maybe not random marks. They'll be more like squiggles, and you can tell that these are meant to be words on a page, which is awesome. It's exactly what we want to see in preschool. You might say to them, what does this say? What did you create? Tell me about what you did here, right? Do you want me to help you communicate this in writing with my words? And
we do that a lot in our centers. So you can easily do that at home, where we ask children to tell us about something, and then we ask if they want to write about it or should we write it for them. But they definitely get the idea that what they've said is valuable and special, and it should be communicated through these marks. They practice it themselves, and they start to like to do it. But we definitely want to do that in our programs, but again, easy to do at home.
Easy to do at home.
In your other example, I wanted to come back to, you said that we tracking writing samples over time. We do that in our centers too, because it not only helps you as a parent celebrate the success your child is having and see that development over time, it helps you understand where they're struggling potentially or where their strengths are. So you can support them and give them new opportunities based on, maybe you're seeing their fine motor needs a little bit more help. So get some puzzles out with those knobs, get the Play-Doh out. It's not sitting down with a writing utensil and just practicing writing over and over again. You can really understand, and you can also understand how they're thinking and cognitive development and social emotional development just by how they're expressing things through their writing.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot about my kids through what they do with a blank piece of paper and some crayons. Sometimes it evolved into comic books about imaginary friends I didn't even know they had, things like that. But I wouldn't have known if I hadn't slowed down to ask them. And I do keep a binder with their little, because I'm a former teacher, I do keep a binder with dated art over the years and writing samples. I think it's really, really cool this age too, because you touched on this a little bit earlier, but they do start to recognize letters. And I don't know about you, but I mentioned this before. I got really excited whenever I would see C's anywhere, because my name is Claire and it started with a C. So maybe you've got your son's name is Scott and you're at the stop sign and they see the S in the stop sign. Encourage that. If they say, look at that, you can say, what do you see? I see an S. What is S? What does an S sound like? Do you remember what the S looks like? Even if you're driving in the car, they're visualizing it, right? These are all pre-writing skills.
Yeah. And we talk about environmental print a lot in a group setting or in a school setting. And what I just want to encourage, and you can do this at home too, is that it's using print or having words in the environment, but make sure it's meaningful, not decorative.
Right.
So if I were to go in a space and there was just alphabet stuff all over the walls, it would feel very decorative. It wouldn't feel purposeful for the child. But if there's a lot of print for that, maybe in dramatic play, that they've set up a whole shoe store and there's signs that they've written, and they've written out the prices, and they've written other things about the sale sign or whatever they're writing. That's environmental print. That's authentic and meaningful. Maybe you bring in take-up menus from somewhere. Or there's food boxes and containers that have writing on them, but that's all meaningful versus decorative. So just think about that and how you could bring that into your own home as well.
I think that's really important to highlight, because at this point in child development, obviously, again, speaking of the whole child, the imagination is starting to burst, right? Preschoolers moving into K-prep and kindergarten is starting to have some really rich pretend play. pull the writing into that, right? Yeah. It can be all kinds of, my kids, my youngest two set up a yard sale in our living room one rainy day where they were trying to sell me things that I'd already purchased, sell them back to me. And they got out some like flattened boxes from the recycling and they took out crayons and they wrote relics, RELLICKS, relics. And they were things that they thought were from, I don't know what they thought. And they wanted me to pay American dollars back to them for these relics.
It's a vintage.
But
the fact that they knew the term relics
right. So probably from some book we had read, right? But like the point is that they had spelled it incorrectly, but it was crooked and I think some of the letters were backwards, right? Totally typical stuff.
Right.
So maybe that's another thing for us to touch on is, I obviously congratulating the effort that they put into it, not swooping in to say, well, that's not how you spell it.
Right.
Or that the S is backwards in relics. That's part of the learning to write process too, is sometimes letters will be flipped.
Yeah. They're making sideways. Sense of it. They actually don't know there's like these rules that this letter is only going to be this way forever and ever and always. They're figuring it out. They're doing phonetical spelling. That makes perfect sense. It's English and lots of languages are pretty hard and confusing.
Yeah, it is hard.
So I'm glad you're bringing that up too, because sometimes, and even as adults, we do this, is you write something way too big and then you run out of space.
Yes.
Or you children will start at the right-hand side of the page because they don't know they're supposed to start at the left.
Yes.
All that's okay.
It's all fine.
That's them figuring it out. You know what'll happen if they write letters too big and then they have to run out and go to the next line and they're writing it in a weird place. They'll learn through that. Oh, I ran out of space. They don't know. They're like, this works for now, but they'll start to correct especially as you encourage them and support them. When children have, one of the things that we do in centers and I've done with my kids too is write down, well, tell me about it. Why don't you give me some ideas about that? Or put a save sign, or let's make a sign for your door. Every child likes to make a sign for their door.
Great idea.
Just make the menu for dinner, whatever it is. Use writing in such meaningful, purposeful ways and don't overcorrect it.
That's right.
You certainly want kids to start to develop the skills, especially as we get into pre-K, where they get the letter formation, they get a lot of practice with that, because the more that they do a letter an incorrect formation, the harder it is to correct it. But when preschool, pre-K, you're still really encouraging the love of writing. And we all know that the second you start to make a lot of rules about it, or right or wrong, it stops being something they enjoy. This happens with reading. This happens with writing. We know that this happens to a lot of children, and we don't need to do it to them ever, but definitely not early.
Yeah, like let your children's educators take care of the actual technical skill, and they'll work with your child if it's a high quality setting. They'll work with your child in a meaningful way that's with love and connection. At home, just make it playful, make it fun, make it meaningful. Like you said, I love the idea of making a menu for dinner. We would write a lot of letters to family members we'd get them a big postcard and we'd put a stamp on it and learn about them. We'd go to the post office. You can make it a whole Saturday afternoon, right? Let's write a letter to grandpa and put it in the envelope and mail it. And, it can be a whole activity, but it's meaningful to them because and then guess what? They might get something in the mail back.
And give them writing materials. You can set up a whole writing center at home. You they can have their own note cards. They can they can make their own thank you cards. They can do all sorts of things. You want to have those big motor things we were talking about, like chunky crayons and chalk and different kinds of pencils and what makes sense for their grip and what they can handle, different kinds of paper, stamps, dramatic playthings, envelopes, memo pads, sticky notes, anything you can think of. And it's good to have that writing center, but it's also good to have writing in other places around the house. So it's not just exclusive to this writing center, but that there is a place. So it makes me think of like those old writing desks, people that have like a roll up and there would all be your stationery under there. Sort of a kid's version of that.
Yeah, writing center is a great idea, but like you said, have other places in the home too. I'm a big fan of having something on the fridge where kids can write, like a magnetic dry erase board is really popular, or a chalkboard in the kitchen, like you said. You can, and if your child's kind of wandering around while you're cooking dinner, you can say, hey, can you write down on the chalkboard what we're having for dinner tonight? And let them sound it out. Let them ask you questions about it, right? Draw a little picture. What do you think the Brussels sprouts are going to look like tonight after I'm done burning them in the oven? Let's make it a little art and writing activity, right? Just having those materials out and accessible and like, at a good level for your child, safe, non-toxic things that they can just be using whenever they want.
I think maybe in some we could say that writing is a skill in and of itself. That's really important. The mechanics of writing, eventually learning left to right orientation. Again, that's English, but if you're learning that, letter formation, what you do if you run out of room on the end of a page, just kind of the rules of writing and the different styles of writing. And they'll keep learning that as they go through school. But you also want to use writing as a vehicle, and you want that available to your child. So I talked about journaling earlier, whether it's formal journaling or another form of using writing, whether even if it's typing, that ability to express yourself through words, that ability to think critically, to communicate something, to adjust your communication based on who you're talking to. Those are all skills that can only come if your child learns the early mechanics and logistics and value of writing. So have fun with it. Don't worry so much about your child's developmental milestones, and if they're right on track. They will be on track if it's authentic, if it's enjoyable, if they feel value in it, if they have the time and a lot of opportunity. Have them write books like I did in the bookmaking center. Just have fun with it. Write notes to each other, whatever you want to do to just have this be an enjoyable experience and some development that's really important for your child that you certainly will value as well.
Get parenting advice from Rachel and Claire. You can leave them a voicemail by calling 617-673-8881, and your question may be answered in a future episode of Teach, Play, Love. You can also send them an email at teach.playlove@brighthorizons.com. For more expert guidance on early childhood development, check out our family resources at brighthorizons.com.
Thanks for listening! See you next